What we would like to do at this point is, well, we'll start with the upper chamber. So we will start with the Senate. I'd like to give Senator Patrick Testin a few minutes to just update on what's going on in your world, and then we do have quite a few questions we will share, but it's also your time to ask questions to these folks. So Pat, if you're okay to start us off?
Yeah, well, first off, great to see everyone. So Senator Patrick Testin represents the 24th Senate District, which encompasses all of Portage County, most of Wood County, with the exception of Marshfield and a few townships in the northwest corner, portions of Waushara County, northern Adams County, eastern Jackson County, northern Monroe County, and with the new maps, a sliver of La Crosse County. So I've got my work cut out for you. We are in a brand new session, and at the start of every new session, we have new committee assignments. So this session, I chair the Labor, Regulatory Reform, Veterans and Military Affairs Committee, Vice Chair of the Senate Health Committee, serve on the A Committee, Chair of the Tax Exemptions Committee, serve on the Legislative Council Committee, and then the big one for me this year is I'm a member of the Joint Finance Committee. So we are tasked with crafting the state budget, which I'm really excited about. And so, as many people are aware, the governor introduced his budget last month. Actually, was it? Yeah, last month. Yeah, time's flying. And so we're in the process right now. In the next couple of weeks, the Joint Finance Committee will begin to do agency briefs where we have cabinet secretaries come in. We go through their budget line by line, and then we're also going to be going around the state to hold public hearings throughout the state and give you the list. And I got copies here if anyone needs them. So our first one's Wednesday, April 5th at the Waukesha County Expo Center, and that's going to be starting from 10 to 5. Then on Tuesday, April 11th, we'll be at UW Eau Claire in the Davie Student Center from 10 to 5. The closest one to our area will be April 12th at the Wilderness Resort in Wisconsin Dells, and then we wrap things up on April 26th up in Naqua. And so we are really encouraging people to give us your feedback, to show up, give your input on what you like, what you don't like, changes you'd like to see. And what's new this year as well is we created a website for individuals to offer public comment and input. So we're trying to get as much buy-in from individuals, and I know members who are not on the Joint Finance Committee have already begun holding in-district listening sessions so we can get feedback, because the way it works in both the Senate and the Assembly, for those members who aren't on the Joint Finance Committee, we have what's called a very technical term, our budget buddies, where we are assigned members from the committee, and it is our responsibility to work with our budget buddies to advocate for their positions, taking their feedback from their constituents. So as we work and deliberate between both houses, as well as between both chambers, we're kind of rowing in the same direction. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think we've got some challenges we have to address, whether it's dealing with shared revenue, whether it's dealing with ADA pay progression within corrections. Obviously, we've got significant workforce shortages in the areas of such as healthcare and long-term care. But I'm confident, as we've done in previous budgets, that we will roll up our sleeves, pass a budget by June 30th, and it'll be a budget that puts the state in a continued strong fiscal position.
Go right ahead, Scott.
The guy knows what he's talking about, right? I mean, that's how you got to be in Joint Finance. Sorry, I can't quite see everybody. Pop up over here. Use the podium to balance myself. I'm a little twisted up here from knocking on doors for the last few weeks here. I'm Scott Krug, State Representative for the 72nd Assembly District. So it's thankfully a lot smaller area than Pat has to represent. I don't know how those guys do those big districts like that. So mine is basically southeast Wood County, so the Wisconsin Rapids area, down just north of Friendship, then over to about 3/4 of Waushara County, basically all the way up to Red Granite, Wild Rose, a little bit past that, but and then tiny sliver of Portage County. Every map it gets smaller and smaller, so only one town left of Portage County. So we've got the Bancroft area, town of Pine Grove, they call it Bancroft. So this is my 7th session in the Assembly, so this is getting closer to the end than it is to the beginning, thankfully. I don't ever espouse to be there forever, but I always tell people that I'm ready to leave when my book of stuff starts shrinking instead of growing. I might have to change that philosophy because the book of stuff every session starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Thankfully, as we go through multiple budgets and multiple processes, some of the things that we've seen as issues start falling off the wayside, which is great. And start chipping away at some of those at the end of the session, making sure we get to where we need to go. So let me recap where the state budget is right now. Like Pat said, the Joint Finance Committee is finally getting the roadshow going, putting this budget together. You know, when a governor introduces a budget in February, the legislature basically says, "Thanks for coming, Governor, but it's really our job to control the purse strings. We'll put this thing together, and hopefully you'll sign it in the end." So no offense to anybody in the governor's office, whether it was Governor Walker or Governor Evers, but the power of the purse really lies with the legislature. And the reason that is because, like Pat said, with listening sessions for joint finance and listening sessions we all do, that your input really puts together that state budget. The needs that your communities have, the needs that your boards that you represent have, whether it's school boards, village boards, county boards, etc. Those things all go into the legislative compiling, sausage making, we call it, of the state budget. So as you see listening sessions coming up, whether it's the joint finance sessions in Dells or Eau Claire or wherever you get to, or whether it's our individual ones that Representative Vandermeer and I will have, we'll start having ours in our districts in the next couple of weeks too. Make sure you're there. Or make sure that you send us information about things that you would talk about or things that would be there. Because we need that input. People don't think that that input matters. Every email, every phone call, every Facebook message that I get at 2 o'clock in the morning, they all get recognized. They may not get answers immediately, but they all get, you know, thrown into the soup-making, sausage-making process, and those things all end up in Madison for discussion. So it is absolutely critical for your input at this time. A little bit about my session. I took a little different tack this year. For the last 6 years, I was the chairman of the Public Benefit Reform Committee. So it's basically in charge of setting right our benefit systems from W-2, food share, you name it down the line, trying to find those right ways to do those types of things. As Madison tends to be, it wears on you a little bit, so I asked for some new responsibilities this session. Didn't exactly realize that I would get assigned to where I ended up. I am now the chair of the Assembly Campaigning Elections Committee. And I thought that was a really important thing to talk about today, is because, as we heard one of our clerks say, Wisconsin does have the most secure elections that it could possibly have. And now my job, I see it as the next 2 years, is kind of control the crazy, I call it, right? Because there's so much conjecture on both sides of the aisle about our elections and how the process works and how it doesn't work. So we've really delved deep into all of our election processes here for the state of Wisconsin. Whether it's drop boxes we hear about, or whether it's absentee voting, why we still have it, just educating people exactly on our election process in the state of Wisconsin is kind of the mission I've taken on these next 2 years. It is absolutely critical, like we heard, that you vote. My job as a state representative is not to sit here and tell you who to vote for, even though if you look at my Facebook later today, we'll have a bunch of endorsements that you can look at. But to actually just tell you to get out and vote. And to make sure that people understand that it's time to go vote. That we have processes that you can start in the upcoming week, that you can vote early, that you can go to your clerk's office and vote. That the vote that you turn in is secure, that it's safe, that it's counted, that we're going to be going around the state and working with individual election clerks. We've had a few school board issues that had some challenges in some of my smaller areas on how to manage their elections. So we're offering technical advice and guidance just to make sure that everybody knows exactly what the law is, exactly how it needs to be applied, and to find those places that we need to make changes. There are some common sense things that we can all agree on when it comes to election reform. My biggest one this session that's going to take a little arm bending on both sides of the aisle is I would love to see Wisconsin process absentee ballots before Election Day, because there's so much conjecture on Tuesday night, on election night at 10 o'clock when everybody's getting ready to go to bed. I went to bed and this guy was winning, and I woke up and this guy won. Something bad happened. Well, no, it's just the way the Wisconsin absentee ballots are counted. We can't start counting until Election Day. In the bigger municipalities, it takes forever to count absentee ballots. My goal this session is to get both sides of the aisle to agree, and we've had conversations with the governor's office and the Democrats in Madison, to have a Monday processing bill, where all the absentee ballots that come into your municipalities are open, checked, processed, not counted, but prepared to be counted right away on Election Day, so you don't have to go through all the processing of those ballots that morning. It's going to be huge. So to further that goal, I'll be down in Florida next week, down in Tallahassee, meeting with the election officials in Florida. If you look at our demographics and Florida's demographics, we couldn't be very much different as states. They take all our retirees, and they tend to end up going down there to vote. But if you look at how Florida works their election process, it's a state that's 3 times the size of the state of Wisconsin. If you look at any election in Florida statewide, results are posted, they're done by 10 o'clock on election night. Everybody knows who won, who lost, where to cry, where to celebrate. The newspapers actually have a headline to print the next day instead of stay tuned. So we'll be working with election officials in Tallahassee in the next couple weeks here just to say, hey Florida, you're massive, how did you get to do this? And Wisconsin's still struggling to figure it out. So just something's missing there, and I think we can get to that. So we've had some really good conversations across the aisle the last few weeks, making sure that everybody just knows how the process is going to be. Besides that, I'm a busy guy. I was kind of telling my table how my schedule is going to work today. So tonight, if you have a chance to remember, we've got our Latin fish fry over at the Elks, and I happen to be the president of this year. If you want another good meal tonight, make sure you swing by the Elks Club. I'll be tinfoil wrapping potatoes as soon as I leave here so we can bake them today, packaging cookies. If anybody needs any volunteer hours for anything, just let me know. We've got plenty of opportunities. I'm also on my Adams County board. It's my first term on the Adams County board, so I get a flavor of what Lance is talking about when it comes to county board issues, get more of a 10,000-foot view of things. I thought that job would be a lot easier and less political. No, politics is everywhere nowadays, so it's been interesting being on the county board these last 2 years. I'm also a representative on my Tri-Lakes Management Board for my area lakes in Rome. And Lori talked about a little bit about Rome. Everything in Rome surrounds our lake and gulf, output. So really working hard on water quality issues is still one of my big priorities, even though it's not one of my committees anymore. What else do I do? I'm a full state real estate agent. I got a closing at noon today over in Montello, so I got to go get the baked potatoes ready and go wrap those and go get the closing done today. So when people tell you that they don't have time for volunteering, I give them my schedule. Everybody's got time. Hour a week. I mean, it's not too much to ask people. So if you can find an organization that you really believe in, give them an hour of your time every week and help make our community a little bit better. So it's a pleasure to serve, and I'm trying to take up enough time that Nancy could get here, but I'm basically out of everything I got to tell you. So thank you again.
Let the record show that the senator in the 24th district was kind of looking at his colleague there saying, would you please sit down?
I was thinking of myself.
Again, thank you all for giving us questions. I'm going to try to get us started here. Some of them are very similar, so I'm going to just try to kind of put them together here. Right now in Wisconsin, towns have about 28% of the population, but they receive just under 6% of the state funding. Would you like to share efforts that you're doing with the budget surplus, so some of that money can come back specifically to the towns and the villages and the smaller facilities?
Yeah, go ahead, Joy.
Yeah, so I'm sure just about everyone in this room is aware that Wisconsin has a $7 billion surplus. I don't think there's been a day that goes by we don't see a news story or a headline, Wisconsin has a record surplus. Now, I want to manage expectations. While on paper we do in fact have a $7 billion surplus, that doesn't paint an accurate depiction of where we are financially. So the state of Wisconsin since 2020, because of the pandemic, has received nearly $58 billion from the federal government. That came in whether it was direct payments to individuals for stimulus, whether it was direct funds for the state that was given to the governor to dole out through his administration, given directly to school districts, counties, towns, villages, you name it. On top of that, we're currently in an environment where we're still at 40-year high inflation. So as the price of goods increase, so do the revenues for sales taxes and other things. So when you take out the one-time money, which is about $4 billion, that leaves us with about another $3 billion. However, when you take into consideration some of the decisions that were made over the course of the last couple of years in the last biennium for things like cost to continue, because the governor spent about $400 million in federal funds to help with pay progression within our Department of Corrections, and then another $500 million for our cost to continue within our Medicaid budget. So that then takes that $3 billion down to about $2 billion. And so we are trying to manage expectations, because I can tell you, every organization, and I found out this too, when you're on the Joint Finance Committee, you become a very popular guy down in Madison. I had no idea these organizations that existed, but they're in my office every day. We're doing about 15 to 18 meetings a day, back to back, 30 minutes at a pop. My head's barely on my shoulders. But the reason I mention that is because everyone's coming to the table asking for more. Now, we have roughly about $2 to $2.4 billion in new revenue that we believe we can invest back in the state for various programs. Now, as it relates to shared revenue, this has been a topic of conversation that has been ongoing down in Madison, because we all hear it from our counties, from our local municipalities, right down to the towns. And what I'm encouraged by is that we've got great leaders like Lance and the Counties Association, the League of Municipalities, we've got the towns, we've got fire and EMS, who are all coming to the table and saying, look, we've got a problem, it needs to be addressed. Because when shared revenue was first created, the idea was 90% of that would then go back to local units of government. And over the decades, decisions have been made both in Republican and Democrat-controlled legislatures, both under Republican and Democrat administrations, and that's been chipped away. And as it relates to towns specifically, there's a huge disparity. So we have some towns here in the state of Wisconsin, their shared revenue, it is abysmal. Yet then shared revenue in places like the city of Milwaukee per resident receive over $500 per citizen. So our hope is that we can continue to have these conversations moving forward to help adjust that formula. Now, the one thing that I think is going to be a little bit of a roadblock that we're going to have to deal with and kind of figure out is as it relates specifically to the city and county of Milwaukee. Now, I'm encouraged because Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley, as well as Milwaukee Mayor Cavalier Johnson, are coming to the table in good faith, and I've had conversations with both. But they've got a unique set of challenges as it relates to their pension system. I mean, if we can't get to some sort of resolution, they will become insolvent real quick. But the challenge is going to be, no matter what compromise and deal gets crafted, is that we're going to have to make sure that there are guardrails put in place, because it's going to take anywhere between 20 to 30 years to pay off their unfunded pension liabilities. And one of the concerns that I have is that, as it relates to shared revenue, specifically for things like fire, EMS, and police, we need to make sure that the guardrails are put in place so that way future county executives or future mayors of the city of Milwaukee, as well as police and fire commission members, don't get creative and start diverting funds and resources away from what they're intended to. So we're very early on in the process. The conversations are ongoing. I know my colleague, Senator Mary Felskowski, as well as State Representative Tony Kurtz, who are both on the Joint Finance Committee, are kind of leading the charge right now on the shared revenue front. And so what I keep telling everyone, we don't have all the details yet. We've got the ingredients. We don't know what soup we're making just yet. But I'm hoping that we can make some critical adjustments here, because, like I said, we're hearing it from everyone. The inflationary cost, it's not just impacting individuals, it's impacting local units of government, it's impacting our school districts, it's impacting our technical college system, our UW system, you name it. So we're going to do what we can, and again, I can't stress this enough, this is where your input is going to be so critical throughout this process as we roll up our sleeves and try and tackle some of these big ticket items.
Thank you. Could you add to that a little bit? Do you see any funding maybe for education in that part, or is there for K-12 and technical college, university? Is that part of the mix?
These are part of the conversation. So just to put in perspective, when the governor proposed his budget, it was pretty shocking. I think halfway through his budget address, I leaned over to one of my colleagues about a third of the way through the speech, and I said, I think we're in the red now.
10 million out of the 7.
Yeah. So the governor proposed budget as written is about $105 billion. And that's nearly 17% increase over the biennium that was passed and signed into law. A 23% increase in general purpose revenues. And so if we were to rubber stamp the governor's budget as written, that $7 billion surplus would be a $3 billion deficit by fiscal year 27. So again, as it relates to things like K-12, the governor wanted to do nearly, it was a $2.8 billion increase in K-12. Now, I'll be honest, that is an unrealistic number. Now, we're going to do what we can to provide modest increases because we know school districts are struggling, especially with decline in enrollment. And with the revenue caps that have been put in place, our fiscally responsible districts kind of have both hands tied behind their back. And I know I've had good conversations with Craig on these very issues, and we're going to do what we can to make sure we're providing the resources needed, whether it's categorical aid increases, whether it's trying to put more money in the equalization aid fund. But modest increases are probably going to be the MO as we move forward throughout this process on just about every single front, because we don't want to put ourselves in a position that if for some reason, as it kind of looks right now at the federal level, where the economy's kind of on shaky ground, we're seeing some banks that are kind of getting a little wobbly. We don't want to put ourselves in a position where we pass a budget that overextends our financial liabilities and then come to find out in the next year or two have to come back and do a budget repair bill, in which case we're going to feel lots of pain. And I think that's the one thing that we're trying to avoid. And by and large, compared to a lot of other states, we are in a very strong fiscal position. And I think that's in large part because of the work that's been done in the legislature over the last several cycles, making sure that we pass responsible budgets that don't overextend ourselves and put more money into our rainy day fund. So in the event that the economy were to take a turn for the worse, we can weather the storm and it's not going to impact services across the state.
We're going to shift a little bit because we have a special person here. And I know I told the group, you always get the worst weather trying to get up to Wisconsin Rapids from your neck of the woods.
Well, like many things in life, it's not a linear trip, so.
So you get the pleasure of sitting between your colleagues.
Very good. What a treat.
A rose between two thorns.
That's almost spring.
Representative Nancy Vandermeer, what we did to begin is I would like you just to kind of tell what areas you represent and then just kind of what's going on in your world in Madison, and then we'll continue questioning if that's fine with you.
Very good.
All right.
Great. Third degree. Well, good morning, everyone, and happy St. Patrick's Day for those of you who are Irish and even those who are not. I know you're Irish, so. But at any rate, I represent the 70th district, and that includes parts of 5 counties. So I have a small part of La Crosse County, Monroe County, I have that, corner of Jackson County, large part of Wood, and part of Portage. So I've served since 2014, and it indeed has been a pleasure. I appreciate having these challenges presented to me and trying to work with my other colleagues to find solutions in order to serve the people in Wisconsin, especially my district. This session, I am now chair of the Assembly Committee on Transportation. So that's quite a departure, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues from Joint Finance, of course, as well. I also am Vice Chair of Veterans and Military Affairs Committee. I serve on Agriculture Committee, Health Committee, Mental Health Committee, excuse me, Rural Development Committee, and Tourism. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm also involved in leadership with our caucus. I'm our caucus secretary. And then I'm also co-chair of a committee called our Legislative Council Committee. And it's a joint committee, and I'll maybe mention that a little bit later. So I'm looking forward to this session and some of the new challenges and opportunities that are going to come our way.
Thank you.
Continuing question.
Economic development is always an issue, both on the federal level, state level, local level. What do you, to give each of you a chance to, what do you see maybe in the upcoming budget or legislation that can help that, especially for municipalities like Rapids, Port Edwards, etc.?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we've, I'd say, struggled with in Wisconsin is our talent attraction. right? I mean, everything's here. I mean, we've nailed it on how to make our area as attractive as possible for people to come and work and live and stay and play. I mean, if you, like me and Lori, if we live in Rome, perfect, right? I mean, I've got high-speed internet, I've got access to the lakes, I can do whatever I want recreationally, and I can still now work a job in San Diego from the town of Rome and make wages that San Diego pays versus what wages Central Wisconsin could offer. So the attractiveness of our area to people who, say I graduated high school with, or the rest of us graduated high school with, who had left to come back, is something we've really got to target and just say, hey, come on back home. You can do whatever you want to do from wherever you want to do it nowadays. So that's one of the things I think we've struggled the most with. As far as, you know, finding employers to follow that, it's always the chicken and the egg approach, right? Do we work on talent attraction hoping an employer follows, or do we convince employers that we can locate them and get them started and employees will be here? So we're really stuck in this chicken versus the egg type approach to economic development right now. I've always said that, you know, the way that you work this is you get the people ready first, and the rest will follow. So that's my biggest goal as far as economic development, is just talent attraction, just making sure that the people are here, because I hear from businesses almost every day, we'd like to expand, we just have nobody. I've got feelers out for a new position, I got 2 applicants, but 10 years ago I had 40 applicants. Where the heck is everybody? I mean, that's the challenge that Central Wisconsin in particular is facing the most. It's just getting people here, and then we can work towards a lot of the other things we've worked towards in the last few sessions. Still working hard every day on solutions for the Rapids Mill situation. I don't call it by any certain employer name ever anymore, because it doesn't even pay to even mention some of those past employer names. So we're working on the Rapids Mill. Still trying to find an avenue that is acceptable to the governor after the veto of the mill bill. You know, working with the same entities that were interested previously on avenues that they think they could be interested in still. Just talked to a new developer out of Tennessee last week about the Rapids Mill, about hemp fiber production, using some of those systems that are in place for production for different products and different things that could happen. So there's still conversations ongoing about individual economic projects in the district. All those things are still happening every week. You don't hear a lot about it because it hasn't materialized as much as I'd like it to, but there's a lot of conversation about it.
Representative?
Very good, thank you. I'd like to say I think workforce development, or rather workforce shortage, is probably #1. I agree with you. And it's been something that I've heard about declining numbers well over 10 years. I was in my own business, of course. I was an automobile dealer. And we struggled with attracting technically trained individuals to work in our service department. And we knew those numbers were going to continue to decline. So I think we're #1 in a great setting here. I want to say thank you to our technical colleges, especially Mid-State, for their creativity and their nimbleness in developing curriculum that respond to the needs of employers, and having that right here where we can affect people in their lives as they're living them. Some are second careers, some have families already. So this is one of those really big check marks in the pro column to me. Secondly, I want to also mention, in the work that I'm doing this particular session, I'm authoring a bill that would create funding for talent attraction for veterans, for military people that are leaving the military and coming into the private sector. Each year, 200,000 military members come into the private sector, leave the military. It's very significant. And so what we are being involved in is a marketing program. Let them know about Wisconsin, let them know what is here, and then it would be very granular in design, specifically digital platforms, and then of course career fair type venues for them, and let them know what's available. I think Wisconsin is very well suited to attract veterans, and the reason why is, for example, we have Fort McCoy. Each year, usually, excuse me, under normal circumstances, up to 125,000 military individuals can go through for training. Some of those people may be part of that 200,000 that I mentioned. They're already familiar with our state to some degree. So I think that's very important. Many of them bring spouses. Those spouses could be credentialed in other areas. And we've already passed a bill that allows for reciprocation of many of those licenses to be utilized here in Wisconsin. So that transference should be more efficient for them as well. And that may bring an additional person into our workforce. So I look forward to that, to inviting that well-trained group of individuals into our state. Also, Wisconsin, usually we're home to about 350,000 veterans. So we have a very strong set of veterans benefits, et cetera, education, housing, and so on. So that's one of the things that I look forward to working in. Also, in the past, as you know, I've been involved with a number of licensure compacts. I'm working on another one this session, and that creates that, I'm going to say, efficiency and transference of licensure without sidestepping any of our medical practice laws, et cetera. I'm going to be working on another one of those. And what we've been finding is sometimes that transference, and I think both of our colleagues would weigh in, because you've heard from your constituents as well, we've had some lengthy transference of licensure through the DSPS here. So any time that we can create that efficiency is good, especially when those individuals are attracted to work here for an employer. Let's get them into the workplace immediately and not lose any of that valuable time in taking care of our Wisconsinites. So it's just a couple of the things that I'm looking forward to working on for workforce.
Sure, so kind of piggyback off of some of the common themes here as it relates more locally relating to our paper industry and our forestry products. You know, we continue to have conversations with the Paper Council, with WEDC, to see if there's something that can be done, because when you take a look at other states that have a very strong paper industry, states like Maine, Michigan, just made significant investments in that industry, and yet we continue to find ourselves in a position where our mill still remains idle, despite the fact that, you know, of course, 3 years basically. You know, we had a really good group going, came up with legislation to try and find a remedy. Unfortunately, that got vetoed. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, in conversations I've had with the Paper Council to see what their openness is, they are on board to do anything that we can to help not just our paper industry, but our forestry products. The problem that we're running into is that folks over at WEDC have been cool to those conversations, but we're going to continue to try and move the needle and see if there can be any way to finesse it and not arm twist so much, but regardless, we're going to continue to advocate for that. Talent traction, without a doubt, is a no-brainer. I mean, in the last budget, we invested $5 million for talent traction for veterans, as has been already mentioned by Representative Krug and Vandermeer, to attract veterans here to Wisconsin just based on the sheer benefits that we have. And I am shocked, Scott, as a realtor, affordable housing.
I'm waiting, right? Yeah.
And that's an issue that is being worked on in both houses right now, because that's another huge barrier for employers as well as our area, is just the affordability and the lack of stock right now. And that's a real challenge. And so there's legislation that's already out there that's working its way through the process. And then for me personally, I think one of the biggest drivers and motivating factors for economic development is significant tax reform. And I'm sure those of you who were at the last breakfast heard me say this, but when you take a look at the 2020 census data, the numbers do not lie. States that have a more competitive tax rate saw the largest increases of net migration into their states. States like Florida, Tennessee, Texas, South Dakota. Now, these are states that do not have an income tax. It's still a policy proposal that I would love to get Wisconsin to, because at the end of the day, people vote with their feet. Compare that to the states that saw the largest out-migration, states like California, New York, and Illinois. Now, earlier in the year, the Senate Republicans put out a proposal authored by Senator Devin LeMahieu that would put Wisconsin on a 4-year glided path to a flat income tax. taking our remaining 4 tax brackets down to 3.25%. Now, the governor has laid out a marker saying that's a non-starter. He doesn't want to have a flat tax here in the state, to which I say, well, Governor, if the state of Illinois can have a flat tax, why can't Wisconsin? Illinois' income tax is 4.95%. And when you take a look at our tax code, compared to the other 50 states, our competitive ranking is 27. I think we can do a lot better. Because I think if we could have significant tax reform based on all the other great benefits and programs that we have to offer here in the state, people will come here. I'm sure people don't always like having snow 8 months out of the year, but, yeah, 9 this year. But as I often say, we got better beer, we got better football teams, we got the best cheese curds, and we just have to do a better job of selling our story. You know, this is a conversation I've had with some of our folks who work in economic development. I think that's our biggest problem as a state, and particularly as a region. We're too modest, we're too humble. We aren't braggadocious about what we have to offer, but if we're not out there selling that story, we're missing out. Because we are in direct competition with 49 other states who are facing similar demographic challenges as we are. And if we are not doing everything that we can to put Wisconsin on the map, we're going to be in a lot of trouble real quick. And so that's why I think you're going to see and how it plays out as far as things like tax reform goes and how that plays in the bigger picture of the budget. That's going to be a continuing drum that I'm going to continue to pound between now and June 30th.
If you would remain standing, sir. I know you do a lot of work on accessibility to healthcare, especially in rural areas, and you have some bills that you've been working on, and I thought now would be a good time to share that. And then your colleagues can also weigh in on that too.
Yeah, so back in January, I was down at a healthcare panel discussion at UW Milwaukee as it relates specifically to our healthcare workforce, which anyone who has read the Wisconsin Hospital Report forecasting the shortages that we're facing, whether it's CNAs, nurses, doctors, mental health providers, it is shocking. And especially, again, factoring in our aging population, it's called the silver tsunami. It is going to make landfall here in the state sooner rather than later. And that's going to put a significant strain on a whole host of number of different systems, long-term care, our Medicaid budget, you name it. So one of the things that I have stressed is that we need to do more to provide parity with our regulatory reform compared to other states. And that's why Nancy's been a leader on this run through the interstate medical licensure compacts and others, which help for the transferability for healthcare professionals to take their license from places like Minnesota to be able to practice in our state. The other area that needs to be focused on is regulatory reform. 1 in 4 medical professionals spend the vast majority of their time just on compliance. And a number of those individuals are people who would rather spend their time taking care of patients. Now, one thing that we continue to push, and I am going to be dogged on this, is allowing our advanced practice registered nurses to operate at the highest level of their license. 27 states have now passed the APRN Modernization Act. Now, these are nurses who have advanced degrees, years of training. It doesn't mean they take the place of doctors. It just means we're allowing them to do what they are trained to do, which is take care of patients. In fact, Utah just became the 27th state yesterday. They passed their APRN bill, and it really helps in underserved areas. Now, we have hit consistent roadblocks over the years. This is legislation that's been around for about a decade. And for years, it kind of got bogged down because the Wisconsin Hospital Association raised concerns. But last session, we worked with them to get them to a place that they were comfortable with, yet we still have some medical stakeholder groups, primarily the Medical Society and others, who have raised concerns. But what's important to note within the legislation that we have introduced is that we still allow hospitals, if they choose to do so, to allow a advanced practice clinician to operate or to have a collaborative agreement with a practicing physician. But what we're trying to do is also establish parameters that, for the first time in state statute, when a medical professional deals with something that goes beyond their scope, that here's what you do next. And so we continue to work on this legislation. I am confident we're going to get there. In fact, it was really interesting. This week we had the State of the Tribes address. And one of the top issues that was brought up from the tribes is this legislation, APRN reform. And so The governor, last session, it passed out of both houses near unanimously after some changes were made in the assembly and it came back to the Senate, got to the governor's desk, was vetoed. Now, what's interesting to note is that essentially the governor put this proposal within his budget, and we basically were about 90% of where the governor is at on this bill. So I'm hoping as I work with our colleagues in both houses, we can get this signed, finally passed, put it behind us, and again, do what we can to empower our healthcare professionals to do their jobs rather than hinder them with bureaucratic red tape and regulation.
Would you like to comment too?
Sure, thank you. And thanks for mentioning the compacts. And I'll just mention a couple of the others that I've worked on in the past. We had done a physician licensure compact that Senator mentioned already, and that's very important, not only on the in-house treatment for patients, but also for telemedicine. And we saw that, of course, during the pandemic. And I think, you know, along with broadband, access to broadband, we talk about workforce. That is another reason, or, you know, attraction, right? People to come to our state. They can still have that connection to very well qualified medical practitioners, et cetera. And it doesn't have to be just in a large metropolitan area. So I mentioned that. The other compacts that I had authored and had passed into law was the Enhanced Nurse Licensure Compact. And then, of course, last session we did an occupational therapy compact. This session, as I alluded to a few moments ago, I'm working on a physician assistance compact. And I had done some work with reforming some of the laws on that, as far as allowing them to work to the top of their scope of practice as well. So thank you for asking. And you know, I love that type of work and being involved in that. Long ago I was on my hospital board in my community, and of course a very rural community. It's now a critical access hospital. And I think that's a wonderful way that we can work and serve our constituents, because it affects everyone, no matter age, where they're located, and especially our underserved areas, our rural areas. How do we meet them and get them the care they need? So thank you again.
Any comments now?
No, I'll take a minute.
Well, I'm actually going to ask Representative Vandermeer, with your leadership. Sorry, buddy. Although you needed access to care, you know, when you were doing yours.
I could let you help me on this.
That's right, yeah. Keep rolling. With your leadership position, I know transportation is always an issue, and can you give us an update on what's going on in the transportation world?
Thank you. Yes. What I'm hoping to work on, some of the areas that I'm looking to focus on, it's early in the session, we're just getting started, and to give you an idea, half of the members of our transportation committee are new members, not just new to transportation, they're new to the assembly. So what we're going to do, we're having a informational session, and we're inviting Department of Transportation to bring representatives from the 6 divisions and describe some of the highlights of each of the divisions, so we can kind of bring our new members up to speed so that they can do a good job serving in that capacity. But given that, I wanted to say, as chairperson of transportation, there are some things that I would like to focus on. First of all, we have a shifting availability of energy, or you know, our electric vehicles in the marketplace. Right now, only 6% of the vehicles owned in the state of Wisconsin are electric vehicles. And so we need to look at, of course, we have gas tax right now, and that funds our transportation revenue, and it is specifically designated for transportation. Recall, a number of years ago, we passed a referendum that cannot be moved into general purpose revenue funding. It has to stay for transportation. That is contributed from all of you when you buy your gas per gallon. All right, now we have electric vehicles coming into the marketplace. Personally, I think we need to continue to have a diverse type of energy available for Wisconsinites. I was an auto dealer and represented a new car manufacturer for a number of many years, in fact. One of the concerns that I had throughout my time in that profession was from time to time the manufacturer would suggest new types of energy delivery. And it went from hydrogen cell, electric vehicles, etc. My concern always was, how do we deliver that energy to the consumer? Right now we have a network of gas stations, convenience stores that have been well established throughout our country for over 100 years. And now we want to quickly turn and have this opportunity for electric vehicles. So I think there's a number of factors, as I said, to keep in mind when we're talking about that. And that's how do we include that in our revenue funding calculation, number one. Many states are calculating it on cost of kilowatt per hour. But number two, last session I authored a bill. And our statutes here in the state of Wisconsin are silent on whether or not a private entity, like a convenience store, can collect a fee for charging your vehicle. So of course, a lot of people want to charge at home. But what about our electric grid in order to support that? There would be higher usage at certain points of the day. A lot of people would want to charge their vehicles perhaps after their workday. And typically, not everybody works the same hours, I recognize that. However, many people, it would be in the overnight hours. So how do we support that? Not everybody's going to have access to do that at their residence, so therefore we do need some type of availability for charging at like a convenience store or similar. So right now, as I said, a convenience store can't charge you or me to charge an electric vehicle. And so that has to come into statute and allow for that. And the reason why, as I said, I was very interested in this last time, it affects could affect workforce too. You could have commuters, maybe they have an electric vehicle, want to work in a more remote location. Also tourism. So all of that combined, I think, is very significant in this discussion of how do we get electric into those electric vehicles, but still maintaining a diverse choice of energy sources for drivers. So given that, I would like to continue, and this is a big discussion. As I lay this out, it sounds fairly simple, but if we can just begin this discussion, I think it will be very helpful and get some ideas out there so we can begin to successfully move ahead in this realm. Finally, one of the other areas that I want to work on and focus on in transportation is our distribution network on our highways of our raw goods to our processor to the final delivery point, the consumer. We have to have good highways for that. Many times we have concerns with milk haulers right now. And a couple of years ago, I had authored a bill that would adapt the harvest law so that there was a little bit more flexibility for our milk haulers from the farms to the processors. They were being restricted by a number of hours they could drive, etc. Once again, even responding to a workforce shortage. So given that, and given the nature of agriculture in our state, manufacturing and agriculture, those are our top two industries. And I think that once again, we need to make sure that we have an adequate highway system, etc., in order to make all of that movement possible.
Thank you. You mentioned agriculture, obviously that's a big part of this. I know Senator Teston, the Farmland Preservation Program, any update on if your office is working in that or believe to reintroduce some legislation?
Yeah, in fact, we have reintroduced the Farmland Preservation Tax Credit. So this is a tax credit that's been around since I think the late 70s, and there hasn't been any significant changes made to it in several years, which is unfortunate because I believe in the last 15 years or so we've lost nearly 1 million acres of productive ag egg land, which is concerning, especially given the fact that we are one of the largest producers of potato and vegetables here in the state of Wisconsin. We're one of the top growers of corn, soy, and so we need to make sure that our egg economy remains viable for future generations. So last couple sessions we've been working on this, and it seems like we get closer and closer, moving the ball down the field. And I think we're in a really good spot this time around, because when we reintroduced the bill, I now have co-chair Senator Howard Markline is a co-sponsor of the bill, and if you can get the co-chair of the Finance Committee to sign on to your legislation, you're feeling pretty good. And so essentially what we did, the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection over the last several years has sent out surveys on the Farmland Preservation Tax Credit Program. And the survey results of that have been really informative on how we have crafted this legislation, because a lot of farmers like the program, but the incentives aren't keeping up with demand. And so one of the biggest hurdles within the program is that currently when you sign up for the Farmland Preservation Tax Credit, to continue using these tax credits, it's a 15-year commitment. So this legislation would take it from 15 years down to 10, and then we would actually bump up the tax credit, so it will encourage more buying and usage for individuals. And I know, Shane, you've probably been on the forefront of this in your time in land conservation, and we're really hoping, because it encourages farmers to use best practices, things like cover crops, and again, especially in areas like the central sands, where we have been very sensitive to things like nitrate contamination, phosphorus runoff. We want to continue to provide farmers the tools necessary to be good stewards of their resources, doing what's best for their land, as well as making sure we maintain a healthy watersheds here in the central sands.
Thank you. I would like to, with the time we have left, I certainly want to open it up, open the floor up for questions. And Scott assures me if you have very difficult, complicated questions, he'd be happy to. Although he may kick it over to the Senate. So, anybody would just like, go right ahead.
Of course I have lots of questions for you guys, so I'll save some of those maybe for April 5th, for our advocacy day for Synergy. But my first question is regarding the manufacturing and agriculture credit. Currently in the governor's budget, he is trying to eliminate that, and as Nancy of course just said, agriculture and manufacturing are our two top industries. Can you tell me what you're hearing about it? A lot of private sector businesses weren't aware of it until we directly called them so they could reach out to their legislators to talk about it. So just want to touch on that a little bit.
It's not going anywhere. It is wildly popular with by smallest of small manufacturers all the way up by big employers. So for example, there's a business out in the industrial park, I won't name which one it is, but they were able to employ the manufacturer and agricultural tax credit to pay for health care for all their employees. That tax credit basically took an issue off the table for them. So I'm actually writing a bill right now with Senator Hutton's office to expand the manufacturer's tax credit to different, well, I can't say which employers it would benefit yet until it's written, but there are other employers who didn't quite fall under the right NIC codes and SIC codes that would qualify for it, that should qualify for the same tax credit too. So that's just not going anywhere. It's just a good example of how sometimes when you see legislative proposals, don't always believe what you see, right? I mean, especially when it comes to budgets, like I said earlier, the legislature will craft the budget. The things that are popular are going to stay. You're not going to see a lot of things eliminated that were long-standing law just because they're in a budget proposal. So that one's staying because it's absolutely necessary for my district in particular.
You kind of made your day.
And I was just going to add,
I'm sorry.
and great to see you. I was also going to add, from the agriculture community too, I think that's been a very important piece for a long, long time for them, especially in the volatility and the up and down nature of their market. Agriculture doesn't always have a lot of control on their pricing, obviously, and this can be, just as Scott had mentioned, with your example, this can be a tremendous piece in keeping our agriculture economy very strong. Don't forget, we're number 2, and that's in our state, and it's a $104 billion industry. Half of that comes from dairy. So I believe it is very incumbent on us to protect that industry and keep it strong. Thank you.
So yeah, question for Pat. So you talked about that the 7 billion isn't really 7 billion, right? So then how do you balance that with the desire for the flat tax? In terms of the give and take between that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because the way we kind of score things like tax cuts, it's actually viewed as spending, which in I think every budget, going back to Governor Walker's first budget in 2011, when they've had tax reform, it's always gone out to show a structural deficit moving forward. But yet, every time we have cut taxes, we have taken in more income into our state coffers, which has helped the general fund. And so, while it may be scored as a spend, that's because the way the Legislative Fiscal Bureau calculates that, it's statically, not dynamic. It doesn't factor in growth, doesn't factor in that when you give consumers more of what they earn, they're going to make wise choices with that money. And that's one of the big things that I think should be a driving force for us moving forward is everyone complains about the growth of government. Well, we have an opportunity to start getting money out of Madison and start using some of the $7 billion surplus for one-time investments. And those are conversations that are being factored in as it relates to our transportation budget. These are conversations that are being factored in as we talk about our capital projects all across the state for the UW system, the technical colleges system. But again, historic trends have shown when we cut taxes, while it does show a structural deficit moving into the next fiscal years, we've actually taken in more, and it's actually been a windfall for the state.
Other questions, comments?
Craig Braun, Superintendent WRPS. Thanks for coming. One of the pieces that you mentioned in talking about the development of the biennial budget is potential of transitioning additional dollars into the equalized aid formula. I'll just point out that's what the state chose to do last biennium, and that equated to 0 new spendable dollars in terms of legitimate investment in public education. It's a tax reduction, which I'm fully supportive of, and I don't know anybody that wants to pay more taxes. But on the same hand, we're keenly aware of the fact that we have the circumstances that we're facing in terms of the private sector. Those circumstances also face the public sector. And just because we're funded by tax dollars and support from the state doesn't change those needs. It also doesn't change the fact that we are now in Wisconsin Rapids the second largest employer as a school district. And I think economically speaking, not to mention the work that we're doing, but economically speaking as an employer in the area, that level of importance and that sort of competitiveness is super important. And when you're talking about the things that you're talking about in terms of inflation and the challenges that private businesses see, those things aren't mitigated in any way, shape, or form for the public sector. So I would advocate for some kind of thought process in terms of budget development. Clearly we knew in education that the governor's budget would just be signed and returned and everybody would be happy. But on the same hand, if we paint ourselves into a corner yet again with rhetoric around historic investment in education, which came from both parties, that's not a bag on you guys, that in fact is not what it was. And I understand that we had access to ESSER dollars. I understand that we had expectations around what we do in terms of pandemic recovery and all of those things in place. But as you mentioned, in the $7 billion projected surplus, some of that is because it's one-time money. ESSER dollars are one-time money. So keeping in mind that we have to make some attempts at keeping pace for all of the reasons I mentioned, and of course the primary reason is for kids, because of course kids in Wisconsin deserve a great education, and we try our best to give that to them.
I think, when it comes down to that, I think there's got to be an equation. And this equation has always eluded us is not necessarily that there's not accountability, but the decision makers in Madison always like to have this piece out there saying, okay, I have no problem, increasing to even a more historic level of funding. But there's also this component coming back to us in our legislative caucuses saying, hey, we got to figure out this accountability piece. We want to make sure that as the investments are being made, that the parents in the districts know exactly what's coming out, where, when, why, how, results, and the report card's a good start, but I think there's more of an accountability equation that's got to be brought to the table, and I think that's, once our caucuses get there, I think you'll see a much more robust investment than you have in the past, because I think that's one piece that's eluded us since we first talked about that in the 2015 budget, and had a bill, AB1 in that session, to try to create this more standardized accountability piece for that funding to be answered back on some rate of return model that a lot of policymakers want to see. So I think you'll see investment.
Based on student performance, or what accountability are you referencing?
That's where we're gearing it towards. It's not only just student performance, but it's district finance performance too. So the formulas that will be created for that model, whatever it's going to be loosely based on the AB1 from the 2015 session, trying to tie that in, whatever way it's going to end up. But that's the key phrase that gets thrown around in the budget discussion right now is more funding equals more accountability.
So taking into account then community demographics, shifts in populations, expectation and need, location, geography, all of these pieces would be well taken into account in terms of that new accountability or additional accountability structure?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the equations that we're facing, especially in districts that I have, like in Adams Friendship and the Coosa districts, where it's high poverty, but it's also high property value of school districts. Trying to take those into the equation too, just to make sure. But when declining enrollment is hitting every district in the state of Wisconsin, that plays a huge role into how we figure out how funding is going to happen. So that's why we have to focus so much on economic development, is to stop this trend of declining enrollment across the districts where your costs don't change because you have the same amount of buildings, but there are less students, and we try to get those dollars out as best we can to address those situations.
On that issue, I'm not sure if everybody is aware, but in the technical college system, a significant part of our funding, that's based on outcome-based.
Right, yeah, that's what we switched to, and I've been on college and universities committee for 12 years now, and that outcome-based, that Dr. Foy and the tech college system actually proposed. Said, we'll gladly give you that if you want to come to the table and view this as a model moving forward for other systems. If we can get more money out of the state because we're showing more of these things, it works. Tech college system's happy for it. So.
One question, go right ahead.
Yes.
You get the final
Woo,
word.
okay, it's gonna be a statement and or question. So first, I'd like to thank Nancy about your piece of legislation with the veteran support for talent attraction. So one of Synergy's main programs is Central to Success. It's a regional talent attraction and retention campaign that we're looking to invest over $1 million in with our stakeholders plus the Workforce Innovation Grant with Mid-State Technical College. And one of our primary areas of focus is veterans, so I greatly appreciate that support already at the Capitol. But other focuses that we have in that program are really around the professional services and then the UW graduate, the bringing them back here, right? How do you feel that the legislator is taking, with that piece of legislation specifically, is WEDC going to be running that program again?
Yes.
Are there going to be more, I don't want to say restrictions, but more guidance on how they track that so we can have some tangible data here in central Wisconsin that we can use as a resource as we try to promote ourselves as a region?
Yes, I think we're thinking along the same lines. And as we develop this bill, we're early on again in it. That is one of our considerations, is having some guidelines and results driven, just like we talked about. And so that in the future, we can, make some changes to it to improve the program as well. So these measurements are very important. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Craig, could I ask one more completely unrelated question to what we've heard about so far?
Craig.
Thank you. By the way, just for fun, if your first name is Craig, please raise your hand right now. Is that not? See?
If your name is Craig,
Yes.
you've been a director at the Heart of Chamber, at the Heart Board, raise your hand.
Yeah.
A historic transition, Scott. Yes, it was fantastic. So anyway, I'm associated with Wood County Public Health. Impact Group is what it's called now. It's a derivation of what used to be the Drug Task Force and so forth and so on. There's law enforcement representation and whatever. So anyway, point being is that there's legislation that exists that allows the development of hemp-based THC derivatives and the sale of those derivatives. So Delta 8 is what typically people are hearing about now. Is widely available in the state of Wisconsin and elsewhere. It's not just here. Wood County, as well as municipalities, had taken some opportunity at enacting some new ordinances that restrict the sale of those THC-based or hemp-based THC derivative products to those 21 years of age and older. And for the reference for the group, because you may not know, I know our legislators are aware because I've talked to at least Scott and Pat about it, or at least emailed them. Delta 8 THC, THO, Delta 9, Delta 10, these things are just the same and as psychoactive as regular THC from marijuana. And when we have certain, and everybody knows that vaping is a thing now. So most of the form that this takes is vaping as well as edibles, candy, and things that look just like run-of-the-mill normal products that are sprayed or coated with Delta 8, and then you eat it and get the high from it. This stuff is sold in gas stations and, I mean, pretty much multiple places. Wood County Public Health has a list of places that in Wood County that it's sold, freely sold. The problem is that clearly marijuana is not legal in our state. I'm not sitting here advocating for marijuana. In fact, I spoke against it at the Wood County Board because of the ramifications it has. We don't even have medical marijuana legalized in the state of Wisconsin, yet we basically have free and ubiquitous access for kids of all ages and people of all ages to Delta 8 THC products. That's an issue. When we have kids that are vaping in school, or in some cases have edibles, you don't know whether it's Nerds the candy or Nerds Delta 8 laced THC, because there's no labeling expectation. It's very unregulated. We've also had students that have had issues with what are referred to as overdoses, sometimes adverse reactions, because of course overdosing on THC is not really a thing that you can technically do, but on the same hand, adverse reactions, changes in behavior, visits to the emergency room. That's not just a WRPS issue. That's not just a Lincoln High School or River Cities High School issue. This is a statewide issue, and I don't go to other states and ask questions, but I'm guessing it's happening throughout the nation. Most of what kids have in terms of vapes are not nicotine-based now, or if they are, they've got that and Delta 8 or other THC derivatives in their carts, is what they're called. Clearly, kids under the influence or having access to this stuff is not something that is beneficial in the school environment. So I'm hoping that as a state we can see our way through to develop some form of legislation that either limits or prohibits the sale to a certain age range of individuals for Delta 8 and other hemp-based THC products, or regulates the industry in some way, shape, or form. Before someone says, yeah, but there's responsibility for the persons that's selling it. That's 100% true. Although keep in mind, Wood County Public Health sent folks in to have these conversations, and there is nothing that precludes them from selling it to an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 16-year-old. And that is not the way businesses should be run in the state of Wisconsin. Now, if it's immoral or a poor decision, fine, but community judgment based on your behavior isn't enough to limit behavior, if you know what I'm saying. So I would hope that we can do something as a state to move the needle on that and create expectations for that Delta 8 and other hemp-based derivatives. Sorry for the long diatribe, but it's a passion for me.
Yeah, no, you're not alone. We hear from SROs at all the schools too. So.
Yeah, and I can tell you, Craig, is this is one of the unintended consequences. So when we created the hemp pilot program back in my first session, it was regulated by the state. You had the Fit for Commerce certificates. But this is one of those issues because at that time, our regulations only dealt with Delta 9. And what has happened is one of these prime examples of where the private sector moves a lot faster than what government regulation can keep up with.
Chemistry.
Yeah, the chemistry. So these processors have been able to isolate different the cannabinoid oils within the oils and within the plant. And then they've then been able to concentrate it and create these Delta 8 and Delta 10 products. Now I'm aware that the county passed an ordinance making sure you gotta be, 21 or older to possess it.
Correct.
The problem that we're running into right now, so since our state program transitioned to the federal program, the hemp program is now run by the USDA, as it relates to Delta 8 and Delta 10, it's still sort of a gray area at the federal level. So I think we can have conversations at the state level, but this is ultimately going to be an issue that needs to be addressed by the feds, and it's kind of up in the air. And so I'm hoping, working with our federal delegation, we can kind of work on that issue and see if there's any movement to get some changes at the feds.
Awesome.
And I think in the meantime, with all the work that Public Health and Wood County's been doing on it, it frustrates the out of me.
You can say hell, Scott. I don't care. You don't offend
I'd like
me.
to, but the governor says it more than I'll ever want to say. Honestly, it just frustrates me that we leave parents out of this equation, that we just don't have that conversation ever, that parents have to be more involved in monitoring what a 10-year-old's going to do going into a smoke shop in Wisconsin Rapids to try to get to Delta 8. It's mind-boggling to me that, yes, we do need a legislative fix. We do need to figure out a way to get ahead of the chemistry, but some parental responsibility with some of these things, just to take it off the government's plate would be a great education component for public health to work on too, because I would love to be able to wave our magic wand and fix all of the problems that everybody has as far as everything goes, but sometimes it's just not government, and sometimes it's community responsibility, parental involvement, and just making sure that we're all on the same page as a community that'll stop it from happening. I mean, if the community got together, basically, petitioned to the smoke shop saying, hey, this is something we just don't want in our community anymore, that changes. That moves the needle too. So, I mean, that's why I talk so much about how important spring elections are when it comes to government. That's why I talk about all these other things besides just saying, hey Madison, hey Washington, fix it, because we're the damn slow, I'll say damn. We're the damn slowest forms of government that there is between the state and federal government to fix emerging issues. So that's why we've got to start picking good local leaders and making sure that good local decisions are made too. So I appreciate it, but it was one of those top issues for me is the author of the CBD bill and working with Pat on the hemp bill and hearing all this pressure we hear from our communities about legalized marijuana and recreational marijuana, but don't let me do this part either. So I struggle with this one as a libertarian-minded guy. Where do we fall on these issues?
Who just spoke for more government in terms of school spending, of course, because that's a whole different tack, Scott. The problem with your statement is that it's contrary to every other aspect of how we investigate, coordinate, and work as a society. My kids that are under the age of 21 can't go buy beer. This is Wisconsin. For the love of Christ, we drink beer all the time. It's nearly Germany. There's parents that bring their kids to the vape shops to do Delta 8 with them. Yes. And to say that it's a community issue, that we just have to hold one another accountable to a different standard. Christ, if we did that, we'd solve all the problems we have.
That would be great.
Absolutely.
That would be great.
Absolutely.
That's why we're all here.
But the contrary argument, Scott, is that it's not my problem. What other people do, as long as it's just not my problem. Our society is so far against working together in a collaborative fashion. What we're into is disparaging and tearing people down and ensuring that whatever you're doing is wrong and I'm going to judge you, but don't judge me because what I'm doing is right. That's what we've cultivated in our litigious and creative society that we have so far. There's a ton of hope for kids, though, because kids are fantastic. And most kids, this isn't really impacting unless they're choosing to do it. But it's ubiquitous access. It's ubiquitous access. I have 3 kids. One's in college, 2 are juniors at Lincoln. If they went and bought something without my knowledge, and I'm a very engaged parent, how in the hell would I know? I wouldn't, unless I'm rolling their room and so forth and so on. And that's short-sighted in terms of what that relationship for many parents and kids look like. And I'm not sitting here disparaging parents. Absolutely not. They're a partner in the process. But it's super short-sighted to think that that would rectify what is becoming a public health crisis for our kids. 4th graders, 3rd graders with vapes. That's absolutely a parenting issue, not a school issue, yet the school has to deal with it. We have community members that vilify the school for discipline problems. We don't create discipline problems. We try to create or assist in rectifying discipline problems. Putting that back on entities to say, solve it yourself, is short-sighted and frankly terrifying to me. I apologize, but that doesn't affect or doesn't, the approach isn't the same as what we were talking about in terms of any other aspect of expectation in society. That's a shift, 180-degree shift in behavior.
And I'll defend that 100%. It absolutely is. That the parents in our communities need to be more involved in anything and everything. I'm not saying that there's not a legislative fix, but I'm saying to look to us as the first form of that fix, it's going to take forever. We can't agree on hardly anything at the state level, let alone the federal level, where we're classifying drugs. You have more power in this room to take on some of these issues than we would ever have at the state capitol. Those are things that can happen in conversations in this room today, within conversations within the task force today. Those are conversations that can happen in the Wood County Board that happened at the Wood County Board. It's, when you set those regulations individually, those are things that drive the state to take more action. When you start having individual communities making those decisions, then the state looks up and says, oh, I guess I hadn't paid attention to it. I guess now if 38 communities have done this, maybe it's time for us to do it. When Pat talks about affordable housing issues, those are things that communities have to fix. To allow different zoning opportunities, to allow accessory dwelling units, to allow more density and population for their zoning. These are all local things. Madison and Washington cannot be your fix for everything. It just is not how that is going to happen. So this issue, yes, there absolutely has to be a legislative fix, like Pat described. But there are community fixes to all the things we talked about in this room today. There absolutely are, 100%.
Use that same logic to other applications then.
I do, and that's why I want more parental involvement and output of accountability for school districts. It's the same equation.
The beauty of our society, including forums like this, is we all have opinions, and we all have the right to state those, and we debate, and we talk, and we don't fight. No, in some areas they do. But this is central Wisconsin, people. I want to thank, if you are an current elected official or running for office, you deserve a round of applause. Because you are putting your name out there for everybody to throw things at you, basically, and debate, etc. But we thank you very much, because we could certainly not move anywhere as a society if we didn't have people that are in leadership positions. So thank you very much. We'd also like to thank Hebert Law Offices. We'd like to thank MSTC. We'd like to thank Synergy. Synergy's been a little vocal this morning.
Hey, I was nice.
And I'd like to thank Domtar for your sponsorship. We couldn't have these types of discussions without you. We also like to thank Wisconsin Rapids Media for recording it, and they play a huge role in whether you have Solaris or you have Charter. They are on there with lots of programming. I'd like to thank the Chatterbox. They were our caterer this morning, and I'd certainly like to thank the part of Wisconsin Chamber. Thank you all for attending, and remember, in April, vote. Thank you. Have a good day.